Alrighty, 125 podcast. We're working on our Voice over IP network lab. We're now shifting gears to the router. The last podcast I did the switch config. Go view that one if you need to. We're now going to jump into the router config, and this will probably going to end up being like two podcasts here. But we're going to dig in and get the basics on the router, and then we'll probably come back in the next podcast and do the phone. Well, real quickly again. We've created VLANs here and shrunk them to the router. So on the router, obviously we have to do the three sub-interfaces to recognize VLAN 1, VLAN 10, VLAN 50. We're then going to create DHCP scopes, one for VLAN 10 and one for VLAN 50. And then we'll need to do our NAT configuration and then the phone configuration. So we have a couple blocks of config we need to do here. So I'm going over to my router. I'm already consoled in. I will get to enable mode. I will get to configure mode. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a host name on this guy, and I'll do something like CME router, call manager express router. So I have a host name on. Now I need to do, I would put my IP addresses on to get my ports active. So we're going to do that. We're going to put we're going to take care of the inside interface and these three sub interfaces. That's what we're going to do now. So I need to select my interface Fast Ethernet 00, and just like we did with our sub interfaces before, we're going to say no IP address because all the IP addressing is going to go in the sub interfaces. We're going to turn this on, no shutdown, and then we're going to exit out. Now we're going to go, and there's the port coming online. Now we're going to create our three sub interfaces. So we're going to do, I'm going to do VLAN 1 here, the default admin VLAN. Then I'll do 10, and then I'll do 50. So let's go VLAN 1 first. So we'll do interface Fast Ethernet 0/0.1 for subinterface 1 for VLAN 1, if you will. I'm going to put a description here. Description router interface for VLAN. Actually, I think I'll call it like admin VLAN 1 or something like that. That way when I see this, I'll know this is set up for VLAN 1. We'll do the encapsulation on this guy. We need .1Q1. It's going to, the switch is frame tagging all the VLAN 1 traffic as tagged with 1. So we want the router to recognize that VLAN 1 tag. That's what we're saying here. We need the IP address on this guy. We need the IP address to be this one right here, 172.16.1.1. I'm using this third octet to represent VLAN 1, just to kind of make it easy for us to look at when we're dealing with. So we need IP address, 172.16.1.1. 255.255.255.0. We're going to do a exit on this guy, and then we can move to the next sub interface. I'm going to do the voice VLAN here, sub interface 10 next. So I'm just going to be smart. I'm going to use my up arrow, and I just got to be careful when I'm doing this. Interface Fast Ethernet 0/0.1. I'll make it a 10. I'll pull up the description, and I will say router interface for voice VLAN 10. Then I'll hit the enter key. I now need the encapsulation. So I have encapsulation.1Q10 for VLAN 10. I'll put the IP address in, and again I'll grab that from the map, but I'm using 10.1 for VLAN 10. And then that guy is set. I will do the same thing for VLAN 50. Pull up my up arrow, change the sub interface to 50 for VLAN 50. I'll pull up the description, router interface for data VLAN 50. Then I will do my encapsulation .1Q50, and then I will plug in my IP address, and this will be 50.1 for VLAN 50. So if I exit right now, I should be able to see, show run, there we go. I should see my three sub interfaces. Fast Ethernet 00, no IP address. Fast Ethernet 0/001 for admin VLAN 1, .1Q1, 172.16.1, That looks good. 0/010 for voice VLAN 10.1Q10, 172.16.10, all that looks good. And again for the 50 VLAN. Double check, make sure all those numbers look good. So there is my sub interfaces for my router to recognize the VLAN and the VLAN trunk that we set up on the switch. All right, the next part I'm going to do, I'm going to configure the DHCP server for my network, and I'm going to do something sneaky. I'm creating 2 DHCP scopes, one that's going to hand IP addresses out to the voice VLAN or the voice sub interface, so any phone that plugs in will get an IP address from this network. And then I'm going to create a separate DHCP scope over here for the data VLAN 50, so any computers that plug in will get a different IP address from the data scope. Alright, so here we go. Let me get to my prompt here. I'm going to do my configure terminal, and the first thing I'm going to start with is IP DHCP excluded. I'm going to hold back a couple addresses from each of these networks, 172.16.10.1, 172.16.10.10. I'm going to hold back the first 9 IP addresses here. That way I have a couple IP addresses for the router subinterface, switch, or anything else that might be on this, actually I'm working on this one, on this network. I always hold a couple back, so I'm going to exclude them. I'm going to reserve them so they're not handed out. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other DHCP scope. I'm going to hold back the first handful on that one too. So I'll plug those 2 in and kind of reserve those IPs. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do my IP DHCP pull like I've done before, and I'm going to say this will be my voice scope. I'm starting with a voice scope. If I can type, there we go. So now I'm putting in the configuration for the voice network. First thing I need to do is indicate the network for this one. Here it is, 172.16.10.0 is my network. Oops, clicking on the wrong thing. There we go. 172.16.10.0 is the network, followed by 255.255.255.0. It needs to know if any subnetting has occurred. I now need to indicate the default router. Well, the default router is going to be this sub interface here, 172.16.10.1. So 172.16.10.1 will be the default router. I now need something that I have not done before. I need what's called the option 150. What this says is when phones go to connect to the voice network, where do they get their phone configuration? Well, it's going to be the router, 172.16.10.1, but this gets plugged in so the phones know where to get its config. If I were using a server, a phone server, I would plug in the IP address to the phone server. That way the phones know where do I need to talk to get my configuration. So I plug that in so that gets handed to the phones. So 172.16.10.1, again, it's here on the map for you, 172.16.10.1. And then the last thing I need is my DNS service. My DNS server, and again we're going to default to Google DNS for this one, 8888. There is my voice scope. I'm going to turn around and do one for my data scope. So I'll use the up arrow here, IP DHCP pool data scope. I need the network, that's the next thing I'm going to plug in. It'll be 50.0. The default router will be 172.50.1, and I don't need the option 150 because there's no phones on this network, but I do need the DNS server. There's my DNS server. So if I take a look now, what I should see here is my excluded addresses right there at the top. My excluded addresses for the 2 subnets. Actually, my show run got interrupted, so let me restart that. There we go. There's my excluded addresses. 16.10.1 to 10.9, 51 to 59. Here's my voice scope, 10.0 network, 16.10.1 default router. There's the option 150, and then the DNS, and then my data scope, 50.0, 51, DNS. So now as things plug in, as a phone plugs in, it'll get an IP address from this scope. As a computer plugs in, we'll get an IP address from this scope. Alright, so we're on our way. We have the sub interfaces created. We have our DHCP scopes created. We now want to we now want to configure the NAT configuration on these guys. So I'm going to reach over and I'm going to plug my cable in. That's my connection out to the college, my ISP. We're pretending the college is the ISP. We're going to plug that in so it's there. I'm then going to, this is right here, I'm going to set this to be a DHCP address. Actually, I think I do that last. I'm going to plug all my NAT configuration, and then I will turn this port on. That way NAT's up and running for me when the port comes online. So it's plugged in, physically plugged in. I'm now going to configure terminal, and I'm going to do my interface, Fast Ethernet 0/1, and I'm going to indicate that this is IPNAT outside. So now it knows that that's the outside address that will be, kind of the source of the translation. I'm now going to turn around and indicate my sub-interface is Fast Ethernet 0/0.1. These are going to be IPNAT inside. So I'm going to indicate all three of my sub-interfaces are inside. So 10, IPNAT inside, and then 50, IPNAT inside. So now I've told the router which ports are outside inside for doing the network address translation. I now need to put my access list in, so we're allowing traffic through the router to the outside. So I need my access list 1. We're going to permit traffic from each of these networks that we've created. The 1.0 network. If you remember when we wrote this, 172.16.1.0 network, the wildcard mask over here says match 172, match 16, match 1, and anybody in there may go. So it kind of looks backwards, but that's how it works. So anybody from the 172.16.1.0 network is going to be allowed through network address translation. We're going to do the same thing for the 10 network, and we're going to do the same thing for the 50 network. We're setting up all this traffic to be permitted through. We'll exit out of there. Now we need to apply that. So I wrote it, but I now need to apply it. So I'm going to do my IPNAT inside interface source list 1. Oops, got an extra space in there. Source list 1 interface Fast Ethernet 0/1 overload. This is actually turning on the network address port translation for all this config that we plugged in. So now we have the NAT config in. Now I want to enable my Fast Ethernet 0/1 port that's connected outside. So I will say interface Fast Ethernet 0/1. I'm going to tell it IP address DHCP, so it's going to pick up an address from my service provider, in this case the college network. I will turn that on. I'm going to give it a second for it to get its IP address. It's turned on. I'm looking at the blinking link lights right now. In a second or two, it will pick up an IP address. Okay, and I think I'll even do this real quick. I'll do a show interface. There we go. Fast Ethernet 0/1. And we are picking up an IP at 172. Away we go. All right. One last little block of config here before we move into the phone. We are going to enable our router to use an NTP server. So we're going to say NTP. That way it's going to get its clock updated from an NTP server outside. We're going to plug the address in of our NTP server, so it's 0.pool.ntp.org. It should hopefully be translating that good. We're going to say the clock on this guy, clock time zone on this one is PA -4. And then we will do, yep, looks like it's updating itself. I'm going to do an exit, and I'm going to do a show clock to make sure it's updating. And it is 8:11 on Friday, October 30th, so the clock has been updated. That's important when we do phone, making sure everything is up to date and time stamped correctly. I'll save my config, and there is all my basic router config for this network. My sub interfaces, my DHCP, and even my NTP to get the router up and running, and then NAT to pass traffic outside. When I come back in the next podcast, we'll start doing the phone configuration.